So instead of looking for a culture fit in new employees, how can companies make their workplace better suited to diversity? So today we're going to dive into the key elements that make an employer welcoming to a diverse labor pool. This panel will be moderated by our very own Steve Koepp, co-founder and chief content officer of From Day One. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who will introduce the rest of our esteemed panel. So welcome, Steve, and the panel.
Slightly so I can see you all. Hi, I'm Steve, as advertised. And before we launch into questions, I thought I'd ask each speaker to identify themselves, their organization, and what they do there, just really briefly to break the ice. And I'll start with you.
Hi there, everybody. Hope everyone is caffeinated after that break. I know it's been a fairly long day, but thank you for being here. I am Savina Perez. I am Chief Customer Officer and a co-founder at a company called Hone. And Hone is a next-generation live virtual training platform, and we focus on being able to deliver and scale management, leadership, and diversity and inclusion training to organizations. I am based in Brooklyn with my partner. We have an 8-year-old, so came up today to attend this event, and super excited to speak on this panel.
Thanks, Ian. Alban?
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Alban Jacquin, and I am not from around the block, as you can probably hear. I'm French, as my company is, despite its very German-sounding name. And no, we don't make lifts. Schneider Electric is a global energy management company, so I always say we save the world making money by saving energy everywhere possible. And I have the pleasure to be the head of diversity, equity, inclusion, and well-being for the company. I am 41, I am white, I have glasses, and I am wearing Jordan 6 black and red edition. And we'll come back on why I said that in a minute.
Very personal. Amina?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amina Lobban. I'm head of HR Business Excellence for Global Manufacturing, Supply, and Quality at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Takeda is the, I think, largest pharmaceutical or largest life sciences company in Massachusetts. We have 50,000 employees worldwide, and I think about 40% of those are in the US. And the other role that I play at Takeda, which is a big part of what I do, I'm global co-lead of our Gender Parity Network, ERG.
Thanks. KeyAnna?
All right, so I am KeyAnna Schmiedl. I'm the Global Head of Culture and Inclusion at Wayfair. I'm excited to be here today. I am Black, I have natural hair, and I'm kicking myself for taking off my custom Air Max 90s earlier, so all I've got are these flats.
Well, I'm Julie Law, and I do not own a pair of those. Maybe I need to invest in it. I am the head of HR for John Hancock. Our parent company is Manulife, and I have another role with them, which is the head of talent, which is inclusive of engagement and a lot of the cultural elements of our global organization. But my best job is being a mom, and I have 2 young boys, Jack and Henry, that are 11 and 7 respectively. So, thank you.
Thanks, Julie. So our original plan was to plunge right into hybrid work, inclusivity, and really be newsy, but then I thought maybe to start on a personal note would be even better. So I warned the speakers that I would do this. So Savina, could you just share an inclusive moment you witnessed personally or you felt, just to kind of...
Oh, goodness. Wrong seat to sit in.
Well, you could kick it over to Julie.
Let's see what it is.
You want to gather your thoughts.
Absolutely. So I think one moment that really stands out, I think I'm part of one of the smallest organizations that are sitting on this panel right now. We're a mighty team of almost 80 people, but we've grown significantly over the past 7 to 8 months, and I would say we went from about 15 to about 80. But that being said, we were able to do so and still maintain a 50-50 male-female ratio. It's an extremely diverse team, and we did that kind of under, intense pressure to be able to grow quickly. So anybody that's worked at a venture-backed organization knows that you got to do it quick, let's get it done, et cetera. And so we were very intentional about the fact that we wanted to build a certain type of culture. We wanted to build a certain type of team. And given what we do, we need to be able to reflect that to our customers, to our clients. And we were able to get that done. So proud of the team for making that happen.
Excellent. Alban?
Yeah, so actually, what I just did in my introduction was not just to brag about my Jordan 6 edition, although I like to do that, but it's more because 2 weeks ago now, we hosted the DEI board in Schneider Electric, which is gathering 3 members of our executive committee, 15 different VP and senior VPs around the company to discuss DEI topics. And one of them was accessibility and people with disabilities, because I just created in my team about 3 weeks ago now the first global accessibility office of the company to really move forward on being more inclusive of people with disability. And my team member was presenting, said, you'll see at the beginning I'm going to do something a bit disruptive that's going to make people uncomfortable, so trust me. And I'm like, okay, sure. And she did that. So she said, hello, I'm Paula, I'm 57, I am white, etc. And this is because when you cannot assume that people around the virtual table or a table don't have a disability. So doing that is kind of preemptive of people having visual impairment, for instance. So that's why I did that, and I wanted to share, because I was a bit uncomfortable when she did that. But then I realized that I was coming from the right place, so I thought it was a pretty powerful, inclusive example.
Oh, great. Amina?
Yeah, so when you brought this up, I was like, oh no, what am I going to say? But as I sort of thought about it, I wouldn't say that there has been one specific moment, but so I just celebrated my 15-year anniversary with the company, and I started as an engineer in the lab, as a junior engineer in the lab, and have been working in sort of our grassroots women's organizations and the various versions of it throughout the years. And I would say that there have been several moments of inclusion that I've felt personally. And that is when, or that has been when leaders recognize the effort that we were putting into trying to enhance gender parity. I was at Shire and now at Takeda, and sometimes would be invited to, is it a conference, for example, or even a meeting to make a decision about who are they going to select for an award. And so, as you make your way up through a company and you find that senior leaders recognize the additional work you're putting in related to DE&I before it was even called DE&I, those moments are really important to me. And those are things that when I was thinking about, oh, what is this moment of inclusion he's looking for? That's what came to me first.
Being recognized and then being invited. Yeah. That's great. Wow. KeyAnna?
So I would add, I like to give folks kind of a little bit of my personality up front so that they are not surprised by the fact that I'm going to be candid, I am fairly direct, and I want to know how you want to interact with me. I think early on in the pandemic, I've mentioned this to a couple of folks, so my youngest right now is 3. So he was still breastfeeding when we kind of left the office, and we're doing daycare and virtual kindergarten for my older one. And at that time, I had also taken on the culture work at Wayfair. So just launched these things that we call people principles, was very proud of that work. We announced that live to the company on May 18th, and on May 25th, George Floyd was murdered. And so then I had to activate the other half of my superpower. And at some point in those weeks that felt like they went by in a flurry of conversations and what are we going to do and somebody has to have answers, I told my team, right now is really hard for me. I feel like I am failing you. I feel like I am failing my kids. And I feel like I don't know if I can do this. And I just want to thank all of you for everything that you have been pouring into this work while we just try to navigate our way through something that we have no idea what this is going to look like at the end. And my team pulled together and they created this kudo board for me to say thank you to me. And they sent me a gift to tell me how much they appreciated how honest I had been with them so that they felt like they could let me know when it felt like too much for them. And I don't think that we do that enough, especially as leaders in any place, and I don't care where you're sitting or what your title is, you are a leader in any given place. We don't do enough of that. And then really quickly, the other thing is realizing the power of just having an open and honest conversation and dialogue. So we started a conversation series at Wayfair called Change Starts at Home. We invited our CEO to be part of the first one. And after hearing from 4 different members of our Black ERG, Way Black, we invited leadership to have a conversation about what are we going to do at Wayfair to make Wayfair more inclusive. And one of the first questions that I asked him was, he had a habit of saying Wayfair was a meritocracy. And did he still believe that Wayfair was a meritocracy? And there were about 4,000 people live streaming at the time. And he said, no, but I want it to be. And so we need to solve for that. And so when we're talking about inclusion, it's also about demonstrating that humility to say, I think I got it wrong before, and I want to get it right, but I may need help in doing that. And so those are kind of the 2 things that jumped out to me.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, one of our corporate values is sharing your humanity. So your story, KeyAnna, really resonated with me because that's what we try and do each and every day. And if you share some of yourself and be authentic, I think people feel more open to sharing their experiences. And just to that end, I also remotely taught my kindergartner, so I can relate to that, which is not a pleasant experience. Don't recommend it. So one of the things that I do all the time is listen to our ERG leaders, and they had assembled a cohort of talent that had felt that they had been bottlenecked. They hadn't been, hadn't progressed, and this was our Black ERG. And I was listening to a colleague of mine share that they've been at this organization for a long period of time. They hadn't been promoted, they'd been high performing, and there was all these roadblocks in their way. And that led to numerous conversations. I'm now mentoring this individual, and since our conversation, since our introduction, he has gotten promoted, he's had a baby, he's moved, and just that experience around, through that listening and that inclusion and really sharing your humanity, we were able to make some difference in someone's life. So I think for me, that's about being inclusive and really listening to people and meeting them where they are, and don't leave anyone behind.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad we led with this question because it's very inspiring to hear all different aspects of your personal experience. Now to get into more of the policy stuff, which is right now, people are marching back to work, mainly the office. Other people were already always on the job. And I want to ask, how can employers make people feel included no matter what their job configuration is? Because there'll be a lot of different ones. And that also relates to how do you create an equity so that the people who can be flexible feel as included as the people who don't have that flexibility? And KeyAnna, I think I'll start with you because you had some thoughts on this that you mentioned.
Sure. I think, so for those of you who don't know, Wayfair is not just the fun commercials and download the app and then buy the couch and it shows up at your house, right? We also have to get that couch to you. So we have a workforce that is distributed. We have folks in call centers. We have folks who were in our warehouses, in our fulfillment centers, and drivers, right, who are driving the vans, driving the trucks. And so when everybody shut down during the pandemic, there were a lot of folks who realized when we say essential workers, who we're talking about are the doctors, the nurses, the delivery drivers, the folks who are getting you the stuff that you need. We talked about virtual kindergarten, and I'm like, we need a table. And now this 2-year-old needs a big boy bed. And so I'm ordering the stuff from the people who are risking themselves when we didn't know a lot about this disease to come out and still work for us every day. So one of the things that we did at Wayfair to, first is acknowledge, and I think that that's really important. Acknowledge that there may be a part of your workforce that never had the option to work from home, or maybe they always had to go in a certain amount of days to maintain XYZ system or something like that. So how are you acknowledging that? 2, how are you thanking them for that? And so what we started to do was a couple of times a week we would do meals to go. And so those employees could let us know how many family members or whomever is at home with them and bring home food. So we would give them like dinner to bring home, just say, thank you. Like, we know this isn't enough, but thank you. We also had emergency paid time off so that they didn't have to worry about, well, I only have so many sick hours or so much X, time to be off. And then I think the other piece is thinking about what does it mean to be flexible for what type of workforce. So is there like a shared hours model where it makes more sense because you need flexibility because you have small children and you're working in our fulfillment center, and you need flexibility because you've got elder care responsibilities? Can we have you share that job and just make it easier to keep the folks who want to work but just need that help? When we're talking about our folks who are in the office, what we're talking about is kind of the same thing, right? Like, what is going to work for you to make it easier for you to come to work and be productive? How are we having those conversations to understand the roadblocks for folks now? And how our thinking about that is different than it was pre-pandemic. Like, for me, I'm not going back to both my husband and I not being there for dinner for the kids. So that means that I need to leave work earlier than I did in the past to avoid the commute that led to that, right? So having those conversations and then thinking about, well, half of my team is permanently remote. So how do I make sure they're getting access to those like side conversations that just happen when you're passing by somebody in the hallway because I'm in the office, but you're not? And so there's also an accountability on us to say, what's the access to information that I have because I'm present and because there's a bit of proximity bias happening? And how do I make sure that I even and level that playing field by sharing that back out and then building those habits? So I think actually right now for many of us is a great opportunity to just pause and notice the habits that are starting because we're coming back together, and then check in, is that a habit that we want to have? Is it detrimental to anybody? And if the answer to that second question is yes, then let's decide what we're going to do about it. But you can't just ignore it and then assume that it'll work itself out.
Well, thanks. Alban, Amina, would one of you want to follow on that? It's about the whole equity and inclusivity in terms of what a flexible work environment.
I'd love to chime in because I recently went to Nashville where we have a plant, so employees building like big high voltage and medium voltage equipment, and I did the same thing in France to really gauge what inclusion and care mean for blue collars, because we have this big hybrid work policy which says 3 days at the office, 2 days at work, and then it's kind of flexible by country, blah, blah, blah. But then I'm like, okay, so for our shop floor employees, what does that mean? And actually for them, well-being is if you bring me for a shift, make sure that there's enough parts for me to finish that shift, because otherwise I'm going to be sent home without pay, and I'm going to have to cover my, the extra hours with my PTO, and then I don't have PTOs anymore to go on vacation. Or make sure that the computer where I'm supposed to do my mandatory training is actually powerful enough so that it works. So speaking of like leveling the playing field, it's super different. So we have to create personas in order to address the different types of workers in a very, very different way. And I also wanted to share an example because it's one that's going to stick with me, I think, for the rest of my career, of one of our black employees in Schneider. I'm not going to say who, and let's name him Will Smith, like just randomly, like that. So Will's been promoted during the pandemic to a manager's role. And so super great promotion, recognition of his competence and everything. So super excited for him. And one of the first calls he had with his team individually, he was meeting a couple of folks, and one of them addressed him and first thing, says, hello, I'm Will, and say, hello, I'm whatever the name of that other employee was. They were remote. That guy sits in Wisconsin, and Will is here. And the first thing that this new employee in Will's team said is, I just want to let you know that I'm a Trump supporter, which there's nothing wrong about in a professional context. You are entitled to your views, but the fact that the first thing he said to his new black manager was that made Will like super uncomfortable, and he didn't know how to react. So we had a conversation about that, and I don't want to answer too much on the questions you're going to have after, but this is like when we say we want to be inclusive, it works both ways, right? It's inclusive of the underrepresented groups, etc., but also of the people who don't agree on whatever the topic would be. So I think this is something the organization have to think about as we bring in more and more societal topics in the company, which I think is a great thing to do, but you have to face the consequences on what does it mean and where do you draw a line between bringing your true self at work and being respectful of other employees.
Wow. When I have a new boss, I tend to say, nice to meet you, I've heard great things, so looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Might have been other ways to do that.
Indeed.
Okay, I want to thank you. A lot of surveys right in this return to work era have shown that a lot of workers who are reluctant to return to work represent traditionally marginalized groups. In other words, not the white guys. And so what does that say about the traditional office environment that people are going back to, and what can be done to change that? So, Amina, you've worked in both like office, manufacturing, all the parts?
Sure. You know, I think these surveys say the reason that underrepresented groups don't want to go back to the office is that they don't want to deal with the daily microaggressions, code switching that they have that has been stressing them out, right, over the years. And then the other piece to that, I think, is that over the past 2 years, people's lives have changed in such a way that you need more flexibility in your life, not just in work or, you know, it's not really flexible work, but it's sort of a flexible life. And so in my division of the company, we're looking at creating what we call an exceptional employee experience, because all of this is linked to well-being. So the stress you experience when you're at work and you have to deal with all of these things, the stress you may experience if you're a caregiver and you're trying to work and trying to be at the office, all of those things impact your well-being. And so our initiatives to impact well-being include a focus on DE&I, a focus on ways of working, so sort of related to what was being discussed before, and then also career development, which I can talk about later. But for the DE&I focus, you know, it's really what is the culture that we want to cultivate at the company so that employees can develop that sense of belonging and want to come back to the office. And so we have a multi-year DE&I roadmap that's informed by our annual employee experience survey. And the things we're focusing on this year are more targeted focus groups to really understand what employees are looking for, but also having our sites set up their own DE&I local action plans. So what the site in Japan needs is different than what the site in Belgium needs, is different than what the site in Massachusetts needs. I mean, even thinking about the demographics of the employee population or the populations of those countries, right? So really focusing locally. And doing a lot of manager education and not just training, because a lot of times DE&I training, everybody knows, can backfire on you. But really workshops where people can have engaging discussions and really reflect and be thoughtful and really come to that understanding about how should I be looking at hiring? How should I be looking at performance management? What is the DE&I lens that I need to put on that to create the environment that we want at Takeda? And then we also are implementing some accelerated development programs targeted at underrepresented groups. So we're looking to build that bench of employees within the or bench of talent within the organization and really demonstrate to the employees and our underrepresented groups of employees that we're not just, you know, setting this DE&I strategy, but there is action here, and we're looking at really building that talent to supplement our succession planning as we move forward.
Oh, great. Julie, you represent a company with a vast legacy and tradition and culture. What's it like to turn that around or not, so evolve it, I should say, in terms?
Yeah, so John Hancock is sort of a long-steaded organization, particularly here in Boston. It's been a really interesting cultural journey that we've been on, and I think some of the values of shared our humanity, we just went through that experience of revising our values about 3 years ago. And we've led with that. Do the right thing and owning it and sharing your humanity are all critical and critically important. We have a long-standing tenured employee base, and so that change management element and really talking about being inclusive leaders. We've engaged in a partnership with YW Boston, and our DEI colleagues have been really supportive of this, of having social identities training, where we've gotten particularly like our middle managers and some of our senior leaders together to really talk about what it's like for me in my shoes to come to the office and what that feels like and how I identify myself in the various ways that I do. And we've got together in smaller groups, which I think has been really helpful, that there might be things that are visible and things that are invisible, but through those discussions, I think that we've all been able to get to know and learn and grow from one another. We're on a journey. We've just come back to the office in the Boston area anyway, and it's been a mixed bag, I will say. We've really tried to be inspiring in terms of our culture and being thoughtful about language and in the spirit of inclusion. So one of the other things that we did is have an inclusive language effort. In the technology space, for example, there's blacklist and whitelist, which are sort of embedded in some of those technology playbooks and the like, and we've been really thoughtful and intentional about eliminating that because it can help systemically drive bias. So while we're on a journey, I'm really excited about people living by our values, and that sharing your humanity, I think, is just critically important.
Thank you. Savina, I'll start with you on this next question. One of the most important factors in an inclusive culture is the opportunity for career growth. So what are the key elements of creating a culture that supports that?
I love this question. I think it's, one of the reasons why I founded HONE was to be able to provide or democratize access to opportunity within the workplace, right? Talent development shouldn't just be for a select few. It needs to be across the organization. Therefore, it needs to be scalable, available, inclusive. But a couple of other things that we've learned along the way, and that's the fact that we need to make space for individuals within the organization to invest in themselves. So, providing time within the workday, not necessarily post, so that they're able to involve themselves, have those conversations with each other, but also learn as they go along. The other is making sure that it's continuous, so it's not just a one and done. So what type of opportunities are we providing to learners or to the employees that's ongoing, that they're able to continue to progress within their own careers, and for us to be able to provide those paths. So I think that's what we've invested with in HONE, and that's something that we try to amplify through our solution and how we're training other organizations and people within those organizations. The other thing I will say is the fact that it's important to provide networking opportunities for individuals within the workplace. So making sure that there's lunch and learns. We've implemented Donut so people can meet each other within the organization. They have an opportunity to be able to meet those folks that are sitting outside of their departments. And we've found that to be very valuable.
Wow, great. Alban?
Yeah, so one of the things we've done in Schneider Electric is we deployed about 2.5 years ago something called an open talent market, because we came from a world where it was very network-based, a lot of the opportunities were posted, but only a few people could see it, etc. So the open talent market basically makes every job, but not only jobs, but also what we call gigs, so projects and mentors available to everyone in the organization. So in essence, theoretically, everybody has the same chances of applying for a job or working on a global project or local project, etc. Which is great because it's also unbiased by design. The only thing that the artificial intelligence uses to spot whether or not you are qualified for that role is what you put to your profile. So it's not your photo, it's not your name or whatever. So this is great, and that has brought much more transparency. And I have personally worked with some people I would have never thought, never known in the company, thanks to that. The only thing is that, number one, some of underrepresented groups or employees who are remote from those global opportunities don't necessarily know about it. So I know I just opened a role a few months back in my team, and some of the employee resource networks I talked to, whether LGBT+ or Black professionals, etc., were telling me, oh, we didn't see it. So we kind of now have a systematic approach where every time a role is published, and we strongly encourage people not only to rely on the automated emails from the platform, but also to have targeted communications in the different employee resource network Yammer groups so that there's more visibility. And there's also another thing which we are discovering right now, which is both frightening and interesting, I would say, is that some people choose not to put their photos on their profiles on that platform, which is absolutely fine. And a manager recently told us, oh, I had too many applications for that role, so I decided to discount everybody with that didn't have a photo on their profile, which is one way to sort the applications. And the thing is that in the response to the people who applied, he said that. He said, I didn't select you because you didn't have your picture. So I can literally imagine what was the reaction of some people. So I think there's a little bit of also education to people on what does inclusion mean in those areas. And we're coming up with a theme of inclusion by design. So really anchoring it and high-wiring it in all of our processes, but also in the change of behavior, in the behavior of our leaders, which is going to be a fun but long-lasting journey, I think.
I think something just to add really quickly is I love the idea of a talent marketplace, and we started playing around with that. But in addition to that, what we continue to hear from a number of underrepresented and historically marginalized groups is, yeah, I saw this role and I was interested in it, but I don't know if I am the person for that role. And so I think oftentimes we think if we just democratize access, then the end. And so it's also, how are you tapping folks on the shoulder, especially from a cultural perspective? If your culture has told you, and that you could be from the US, right? But at home, your parents told you, you put your head down, you do good work, and your manager will tap you on the shoulder when they think you're ready. And so if you've opened up a talent marketplace, now I'm just like really frustrated because I see all these opportunities I'm excited in, but my manager hasn't told me that I'm ready, or that they see the skill in me, or hasn't opened up the, hey, I want to have a development conversation with you. So I think, yes, take absolutely everything that's been said up here, but then add to that some level of activation on your behalf, and asking other people managers in your space to do the same, because without that, you're still going to be missing a portion of the population. And while there may be visible dimensions of diversity, you may find that, but now everybody's an extrovert that has moved into these opportunities, and the introverts are still feeling left behind. Or that folks who have English as a second language or a non-native speaker of whatever are being left behind. So making sure that you're kind of keeping in mind those invisible dimensions of diversity as well, I think is important.
Just wanted to add on to that, KeyAnna, great point. That's what we heard. We went on a listening tour to find out what's happening with our colleagues, and we had heard from some of our diverse groups that they were told to go to work, do a good job, keep your head down, and things will happen. And as a result of some of that feedback, we've built a Build Your Brand session. It's a learning session that we facilitate. It's on a curated LinkedIn learning path, but we've encouraged our people to go to this training course, to have mentors and do much more intentional networking and connections. And we're now going to move from mentorship to sponsorship, which I think is really critically important. And then what we've done is we've taken the managers of those respective roles that are open, and we have a Meet the Manager series. So we say, okay, we'll come and ask anyone these questions. The manager shares the experience. And that way they can ask anonymous questions, they can get the feedback, and then if they really want to go for it, they can lean on their mentor, and then they can also take this Build the Brand, which I think is really, we've seen an incredible uptick in internal mobility as a result of that, particularly with our diverse population. So it's been really successful.
Oh, great. Now, in changing organizations, there is almost always pushback, resistance, obstacles, whatever you want to call it. what are some of those that you've experienced, and what can be done about it? I think, Amina, would you like to?
Yeah, sure.
first?
So I think it's important to recognize that not just companies, but individuals at a company are on a journey when it comes to DE&I, right? So leadership at a company can say, this is our DE&I ambition, but everyone comes from a different place. And so how do you bring employees along that journey, while acknowledging that maybe some people are further along? So I've been doing gender parity work for 10 years and continue to learn more about other aspects of DE&I, whereas there are some people who've sort of just stayed in the technical role that they've been in. I've heard, one of our site heads in Ireland has said, I'm a middle-aged white man. What do I have to do with diversity? I step back and let others. And so having those conversations with people. But one thing we recently did, a division of our company set up, Takeda has this app called the Immersive, or In Your Shoes. And it's focused on spending the day in the life of a patient. And so it's an app on your phone that prompts you, if you have IBD, so it's an IBD patient, prompts you to do things that someone who has IBD experiences. So whether you have to leave a meeting in the middle of the meeting because you need to go to the bathroom, et cetera. And so one of our divisions thought, well, why don't we do a DE&I immersive experience? And so they partnered with the same company that made the In Your Shoes app, and they collected individual, personal stories from within the organization. So from women, from one of the leaders who was Black, someone who was disabled, and put together this sort of 5-day experience on your phone. And we launched this through the Gender Parity Network. We were able to launch it across the company to a wider audience on International Women's Day. And so a lot of people went through it. And then we had some debrief sessions. And it was astounding to me how this impacted so many people. And in particular, as a mother myself who's had 2 children and has had to go to work and pump, et cetera, there were so many people who said, it never occurred to me that women have to pump during the day, breastfeeding women have to pump during the day. And so many people said, this has opened my eyes to what people of color experience. This has opened my eyes to, some people said, I wasn't aware of pronouns. And so just this sort of 1-week experience that people have, several employees, or many hundreds of employees has gone through, has really changed their perspective. And so we're looking from an ERG perspective to what's the next step for that? How do we bring that to a broader group of employees? Because it's really standing in someone else's shoes that seems to have really made that impact.
I want to, Savina, you're at a smaller company, but you're seeing things through fresh eyes as a startup. And where do you see obstacles in status quo that needs to be addressed? Resistance?
I think with regards to resistance, I think that what we've experienced, what we've seen is the fact that, it's just being able to make time for open and honest conversation around this, around these topics, around diversity and inclusion, around some of the tougher conversations that we're finding ourselves having to have, around Ukraine, et cetera. Everyone's so heads down trying to get stuff done, especially at a high growth, hyper growth organization. And it's easy to say, let's build a culture of trust. But how do you do that when everyone's got 3,000 things that they're working on in any given day? So just being able to, that's one of the bigger obstacles that we face, but also just finding time to be able to have open and honest conversations with each other and providing that space and time to be able to do so. So that's, I'd like to say we have a magic bullet for it. We don't. We're still navigating that. But, where there's visibility, there's accountability. So the fact that from the leadership perspective, we're having those conversations, we're trying to figure it out, we're letting our team members know this, and having them be a part of trying to find ways and answers to this, we've been able to mitigate, some of these challenges as we continue to scale and grow as an organization.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about language. Very important to inclusivity and belonging. Language reflects values. It reflects who you think of as what your point of view is or who's the center, all these things. KeyAnna, you've have some thoughts about that.
I have many thoughts about a lot of things. When it comes to language in particular, I think in the same way that Alban mentioned, like, it made me uncomfortable to hear somebody say, and I'm 57, and I'm white. It's because historically we've been told we don't talk about that in the workplace. And then all of a sudden, generational shift happens, and we talk about all of it in the workplace, and we're gonna talk about more, right? And so, one, you have to, as an organization, decide kind of where you stand and what's your line in the sand, and then communicate that out to folks, and then communicate that out to folks and communicate it out. So for us, right, our talent acquisition team, I don't want to hear from them, I'm sourcing diverse candidates. What does that mean? The reason why the white man in Ireland can say, this isn't my conversation, is because when you say diverse and use it as a euphemism for women, for Black employees, for those with disabilities, you're then saying it doesn't mean default, and default is X. And so we have to stop doing that, because we're not going to move anything forward by not having white men as part of the conversation, by not having those who are abled as part of the conversation. I went to a conference a number of years ago, and the entire panel was either blind or had low vision. And they said, I keep hearing this term, around creating accommodations, and how much does it cost if you have an employee with XYZ disability? Do you know how much we pay for the lights? As a blind person, I don't need the lights. We're paying for all of you people to see, to not walk into things. I can do that without lights, right? So it's really important for us to pay attention to the language that we use, because it sends a message of inclusion or exclusion, whether or not you intend that. And it's not about your intention, it's about your impact. So when you were talking about values, one of our people principles is respect others. And one of the defining sentences in there is, we presume best intent, but we prioritize impact. And one of the ways that we do that is getting a little bit uncomfortable saying, hey, I heard you say diverse candidate. I think I know what you mean, but can you just tell me, are you looking for more Black engineers? Are you looking for more Latinx, XYZ? Like, help me to understand so that I can then point you in the direction of the conference or, these resource groups. Until we get comfortable doing that, we're gonna continue to kind of grope around blindly and hope that we land on it without having to say it. And then that makes folks who are from these underrepresented communities feel like it's taboo for us to have a conversation about who we are and what we experience. And we're all looking to understand more of that, but it has to then be okay for us to talk about it when we're not just talking at the diversity conference, but also when we're talking about performance management, and when we're talking about career development, and when we're talking about engagement. But all of this is tied to our language. The last thing that I'll say, I told you I had many thoughts, pulling it together, is language has been a critical driver for a lot of our work at Wayfair. So one of the things that we did was ran a natural language process analysis of our performance reviews, and started to come up with the words and phrases that were being used primarily to describe opportunity areas for certain groups of folks. So the one that I talk about all the time is the one around women. And we found that the word confidence, how many women have heard something about confidence, be more or do this or whatever, right? That word came up more often as the differentiator between women and men in our organization. Non-binary was too small a slice of the pie at the time, but we did see them trend towards that confidence word popping up for them more often as well, similar to women. So what we did with that was we told everybody in the organization, hey, we might be using this word in a biased way, and the reason I say that is because what I mean by be more confident is going to look different than what you mean by it, is going to sound different than how you hear it. And so unless we're defining what we mean by that, it's really hard for somebody to demonstrate my interpretation of their confidence. And then also, if it's not tied to business results, I don't know why we care. Maybe it's a coaching moment, but should it show up in their performance review, and should they be docked on that? And as an organization that is a pay-for-performance organization, it is really critical that we get the performance reviews right. So once we did that, we worked it into our performance process and calibration. We found that in one performance cycle, just letting folks know and flagging that word women for the first time on average were rated higher in their performance reviews than men, and that has sustained over the last 4 or 5 cycles. So we know that it works to pay attention to language, to build it into a process, and then to hold people to account for what did you mean by that.
Can I add on? I know we're sort of out of time, but I want to add on one thing
You get the
really
last
quickly.
word.
And so one of the things we've looked at is that confidence is a very Western quality.
Yes.
Right? And Takeda is a global company headquartered in Japan. We have operations in Singapore, Indonesia, India. And so in many Asian countries, a woman saying, I'm confident, is not something you would ever hear because that's taboo. But that doesn't mean that she's just as capable. And so there are also cultural differences, right, that need to be considered when you think about how you rate people, how you do performance management as well. So just wanted to add that lens onto that.
That's great perspective. Well, thank you all. We're out of time. I see the red lights flashing and things like that. Hard to ignore, unfortunately. Lots more questions, but thank you all. This was a great conversation.